They called it the last chance auction for a reason. No one came here expecting miracles, least of all Grace Ellison,
It's okay, Harlan.
who slipped through the
I'm
crowd
here. We'll
as
get
if
you
every
out.
eye in the room was a knife at her back. The auction barn,
Careful now, pass
stinking
them
of
down.
dust and
We
fear,
need to get these ropes to her.
buzzed with restless voices and the sharp slap of boots on wood. The hot July sun burned through warped boards overhead, painting stripes of light across battered animals. Cows, goats, a scattering of horses, each one hoping, in some deep way, for rescue. But hope was in short supply these days. Grace paused just inside the door, drawing her breath in slow and quiet. She was 29, younger than she felt, but older than she looked. Her hair, once a soft gold, now hung in a rough braid, streaked with ash and worry. Her jeans and boots were worn thin. No one who glanced her way guessed she had once been an elementary school teacher, or that the fire that took her family's ranch had left her with no one in the world but the animal she was here to save. On the platform in the center, a chestnut stallion stood with his head low and eyes far away. The auctioneer barely tried to hide his disgust as he banged his gavel for the next lot. Number 17, Harlan. Stallion about 10 years old. Can't work, can't race, can barely stand. Useless. Might be good for glue. Who'll open at 20? Someone in the back snorted. A boy laughed. The crowd shuffled, restless, ready for something more interesting than a broken-down horse. Grace's chest tightened. She moved fast, her boots hitting the boards with more force than she intended. "Wait, stop, please, please don't sell him for slaughter." Her voice, rough with panic, cut through the room. The auctioneer's hand froze. Heads turned, faces registering surprise, irritation, even amusement. "Lady, this is a business," he growled. "You want the horse, you gotta pay like everybody else." She shook her head, her voice trembling. He saved my life 3 years ago, during the fire that destroyed the Ellison Ranch. This horse, Harlan, he carried me through the smoke, out past the flames. He's the only family I have left." The barn fell silent, stunned. Grace felt the weight of their stares, felt judgment and skepticism thick in the air. A man with a bushy gray beard stepped forward, folding his arms. "You sure about that, miss? That horse looks half dead. You saying he ran through fire for you?" Grace's heart hammered. She nodded, the memory clawing at her. "He did. He wouldn't leave me, even when the barn came down. My father, he said Harlan had more sense than most men. A commotion at the side gate. Harlan, sensing Grace's nearness, suddenly tried to lift his head. His legs trembled, and before anyone could move, the big horse crashed to his knees. "No, no." Grace ran to him, dropping to the dirt, arms wrapping desperately around the horse's neck. His coat, once sleek, was dull and patchy, and his ribs jutted beneath her hands. "Don't you give up on me, Harlan, please." For a moment, all the world narrowed to the sound of her voice and the horse's labored breath. Tears spilled down her face, cutting tracks through months of dust and grit. The auctioneer cleared his throat, uncomfortable. "Ma'am, rules are rules. If you got the money, he's yours. Otherwise—" "How much?" she demanded, frantic. "50 for the kill buyer," someone shouted, a heavy-set man with cold eyes and a wide-brim hat. Grace dug through her pockets, her purse, every dollar she had in the world, crumpled bills and coins, barely $35. "Please, take this. I'll work the rest. I'll do anything. Just don't take him." Whispers surged through the crowd. Some faces softened, others turned away. Suddenly, an old woman in a faded church dress spoke up. "That's Grace Ellison. Her folks died in that fire, you all remember. A man spat on the floor. Or she's just crazy like they say. Who runs into a burning barn for a horse? Grace shook, clutching Harlan's head to her chest. He's all I have left, please. A young girl with pigtails tugged at her mother's sleeve. Mama, that's the lady who used to read to us at the library. The tension in the room crackled. The kill buyer moved closer, but something in Grace's desperate embrace made even the hardest faces pause. Harlan shivered, struggling for breath, and Grace pressed her forehead to his, whispering, "Stay with me, old friend. Just a little longer." Then suddenly Harlan's sides heaved and he let out a sound, a low, broken whinny that seemed to echo off every wall. The noise startled everyone. Grace, tears running, tried to coax him up. "Don't do this. Not now. I need you." But Harlan collapsed fully, legs folded, unmoving. The barn erupted. Some shouted for a vet, others grumbled about wasted time. The auctioneer looked flustered, motioning for someone to drag the horse away. But Grace refused to let go. Her arms locked, her voice raw with love and pain. "Don't touch him, please, give me a chance." In that moment, as dust swirled and voices rose, Grace knew that if she let go, she would lose everything. Not just the horse, but the last thread tying her to the life she'd lost. She clung tighter, heart pounding, as the crowd's confusion shifted. Some faces melting with sympathy, others hardening with suspicion or scorn. Outside, thunder rumbled in the distance, a storm on the horizon, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Grace closed her eyes, praying for a miracle, for mercy, for one more chance to save the friend who had once saved her. A heavy silence hung over the auction barn after Harlan collapsed, the air so tense you could almost hear each heartbeat. Grace knelt beside her horse, arms locked around his neck, hair wild, face streaked with dust and tears. All her life, she had thought of towns as places of comfort and community, but now every whisper felt like a dagger aimed at her back. Sheriff Clay Watson arrived just as the auctioneer was about to signal for Harlan to be dragged away. Clay's uniform looked freshly pressed, but the lines around his eyes told the story of a man who'd seen too many broken families and burned dreams. He made his way through the crowd, his boots heavy on the planks, a hand resting casually on his holster. "What's going on here?" His voice cut through the room, steady but not unkind. Grace looked up, desperate. "Please, Sheriff Watson, this horse, Harlan, he saved me from the fire 3 years ago. He's all I have left. Clay held up a hand. "Slow down, Grace. I remember you from the Ellison Ranch. Folks say a lot of things, but facts are what matter now. Let's see some proof, all right?" Murmurs rippled through the crowd, some sympathetic, others skeptical. Mrs. Porter, the town gossip, sniffed. "How do we know she's not just confused? Losing your family like that can make a person see things that aren't there." The mayor, Ruth Chandler, stepped forward, her eyes troubled. "Clay, we can't let this get out of hand. If she's not well, if she's a danger to herself or others, we may have to consider other options." Grace stiffened, panic flickering in her eyes. "No, I'm not crazy, I swear. Ask anyone. Harlan really did save me, please." The auctioneer, now tired of the spectacle, crossed his arms. "Look, we got a schedule. If no one's buying this horse, he goes to the kill buyer. Lady's got $35. That don't even cover the feed he's eaten." The tension thickened. Clay looked at Grace, searching her face for truth. "You got anything to prove who you are? Family papers, something?" Grace fumbled in her old purse, pulling out a soot-stained wallet and an ID card. the edges warped by heat. She handed it over, hands shaking. This is all I have left. Clay took the ID, studied it for a long moment, then handed it to the mayor. It's her, Ruth. She's Grace Ellison, all right. A new wave of murmurs, this time with a sharper edge. Someone muttered, "The fire was years ago. Why's she back now, with a half-dead horse?" Another voice, younger, more compassionate. "She lived here her whole life. Let her have the horse. It's all she wants." But Mrs. Porter wasn't done. "People talk. Say she wanders at night talking to herself. How do we know she's safe to be around?" Grace's fists clenched. "I'm not a danger. I just lost everything. Harlan is all I have left of my family." Clay's jaw tightened. "I'll take responsibility for her for now. Let's not rush to judgment." The mayor hesitated. "The county's got rules, Clay. If someone's mentally unfit or homeless..." A sudden shout from the back interrupted. The kill buyer, growing impatient, stepped forward. "Enough talk. If she can't pay, I'm taking the horse. Rules are rules." Grace rose to her feet, blocking him. "No, I won't let you take him." For a tense moment, no one moved. The kill buyer's face hardened. "Lady, you don't want to make this ugly." Sheriff Watson stepped between them, hand resting on his holster. "That's enough, Carl. Nobody's taking anybody anywhere until we figure this out." The room filled with mutters, some angry, some fearful, some quietly supportive. The mayor looked around, then spoke, her voice calm but resolute. "All right. We're a town, not a mob. We'll do this fair. Let's put it to a vote. Who here says we let Grace keep the horse and give her a chance? And who says we send them both on their way?" Hands began to rise, hesitant at first, then more boldly. Some faces were stony with suspicion, others bright with hope or pity. Children whispered, tugged at parents' sleeves. "Let her keep him, Mama, please." Mrs. Porter folded her arms, lips pursed. "We can't save every stray who comes along." But another voice, Mr. Hensley, who owned the feed store, spoke up. "Town's about heart, not just rules. My vote's for Grace and the horse." The sheriff counted votes, his voice echoing in the tense silence. The margin was razor thin. When the last hand dropped, everyone waited, breath held, for the verdict. "It's decided," Sheriff Watson said quietly. "Grace can keep Harlan on probation, but you'll stay in the old Barton barn for now. Folks will keep an eye on you. If there's any trouble..." "I understand," Grace said, relief and fear swirling inside her. She knelt by Harlan, whispering, "We have another chance. For now." The mayor nodded. "We'll get you some supplies, but understand, if the county steps in, or if there's any sign you can't care for yourself or the animal, this ends." As the crowd slowly dispersed, Grace looked up at the barn rafters, feeling hope flicker for the first time in years. But she could still feel the weight of suspicion on her back, the knowledge that this second chance came with 1,000 strings attached. That night, as she led Harlan, weak but alive, to their new shelter, thunder rolled over the horizon. Grace clung to the hope that maybe, just maybe, she and Harlan could find a home again, if only the town would let them try. Grace stood alone in the dim light of the old Barton barn, the door creaking as the wind pressed against it. Harlan lay in a pile of straw, legs folded beneath him, sides rising and falling with each shallow breath. The barn smelled of old hay, creosote, and rain-soaked earth. Shadows crowded the corners, as if the doubts swirling in Grace's mind had taken form and come to watch her struggle. She knelt beside Harlan, running her hand along the ridge of his spine. His coat was dull, his eyes half-lidded. "You're safe now," she murmured, trying to convince them both. "We'll figure this out, like we always have." But the truth was, nothing felt certain. She could hear voices outside, soft, wary, sometimes cruel. Children's laughter drifted by during the day, but at night, the whispers cut deeper. Crazy Grace, haunted by ghosts. "Did you hear her, talking to that horse?" She hugged her knees to her chest, the memory of the fire replaying in her mind again and again. The crackle of flames, the choking smoke, the way Harlan had smashed through the burning door to reach her. She would wake in the darkness, heart racing, certain she smelled smoke, only to realize it was the sting of memory and fear. In the mornings, Grace swept the dirt floor and tried to make their corner of the barn feel like home. She gathered wildflowers and tucked them into the cracks in the wood. She found an old tin kettle left behind by the previous tenants and cleaned it for making tea over a small fire outside. Harlan watched her with tired eyes, sometimes nosing her gently as she worked. But he barely ate, even when Grace offered him the best hay she could scrounge from the townsfolk's donations. There were good days, too, days when a neighbor's child would wander by, drawn by curiosity and stories their parents only half believed. One morning, a little girl with tangled red hair crept up to the barn door holding out a carrot. She hesitated, then called, "Miss Grace? My mama says you used to teach at the school. Can I say hi to your horse?" Grace forced a smile, her heart thumping with hope and worry. "Sure, honey. Just move slow. He's gentle but tired." The girl approached, her shoes crunching in the straw. Harlan lifted his head, nostrils flaring at the scent of carrot. For a moment, something old and bright flickered in his eyes, and he took the treat with soft lips. The girl giggled, then darted away as her mother called, her voice sharp with warning. Sometimes, at dusk, Grace saw the shadows of people outside the barn, neighbors maybe, or just curious onlookers. A few brought food, leaving bundles on the step. Once, she found a folded blanket with a note. "For you and your horse. No strings attached." But she also found rocks thrown through the broken window, and once someone carved crazy into the barn door. The hardest part was the nights. Grace lay on her cot, listening to Harlan's breathing, waiting for the next wave of nightmares. She saw her parents' faces, the burning sky, the world she'd lost. Guilt gnawed at her. Why had she survived when they hadn't? Why was she still here, clinging to a horse everyone else had given up on? One evening, as thunder rumbled far off, Grace sat by the lantern, scribbling in a battered old journal. She wrote about the fire, about Harlan, about the way loneliness felt like drowning. Writing was the only way she could speak her truth, the words a lifeline she couldn't let go of. A knock on the barn door startled her. She tensed, heart pounding, expecting trouble. But when she opened the door, she found Mrs. Porter, the town gossip, and to Grace's surprise, not alone. With her stood two other women, each carrying something, a jar of soup, a loaf of bread, a bundle of herbs. Mrs. Porter cleared her throat, eyes darting away. "I brought you some soup. It's nothing special, just... Well, nobody should go hungry, not in this town." The other women nodded. One offered the bread, the other the herbs. "Chamomile and mint," she said softly. "For nerves, and for horses, too. My granddad swore by it." Grace blinked, overwhelmed by the sudden kindness. "Thank you," she managed, voice cracking. The women didn't linger, embarrassed by their own charity. But as they left, Grace felt a fragile thread of hope winding through her heart. The next day, she began tending a tiny garden beside the barn, using seeds left by a passing farmer. She planted beans and sunflowers, not because she expected a miracle harvest, but because planting was an act of faith, something to hold on to. Other children came, always in pairs or groups, eager to see the fire horse. Some brought apples, some just stood back, wide-eyed and silent. Grace told them stories about Harlan, about loyalty and courage. The children listened, spellbound, but when their parents called, they scurried off, leaving only footprints and a lingering sense that not everyone believed the worst. Still, the divide in town was real. Some people wanted her gone, afraid of the past she carried with her, the strange way grief seemed to haunt her steps. Others watched with cautious interest, waiting to see if the broken woman and her broken horse might somehow find a way to heal. Each night, as darkness pressed against the old barn, Grace whispered to Harlan, "We're not alone. Not really. There's kindness here, even if it comes in small doses. We just have to keep going, one day at a time." She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, judgment, acceptance, or another threat. But for now, she held on to hope. The slow, stubborn hope that maybe, just maybe, they belonged. Grace woke with the sun filtering through the broken panes of the old Barton barn, the air damp and alive with the sounds of birds calling from the cottonwoods. Harlan stood quietly in his makeshift stall, watching her, his ears flicking as she sat up and stretched. For the first time in weeks, she felt something gentle inside her, a fragile peace that had nothing to do with the judgment of the town outside. She began her day as always, checking Harlan's legs for new scrapes, brushing the dust from his coat, and murmuring quiet promises. Every morning, she recited the same words, a ritual for both their sakes. "Today's a new day, buddy. We made it through the night. We'll get through today, too." Harlan nuzzled her side, nostrils warm on her wrist. He looked better, she thought, his eyes clearer, his step less heavy. It wasn't just the soup and apples from neighbors or the herbal remedies she mixed in with his feed. It was the simple fact that, at last, they had a sliver of safety. Grace had started tending the little patch of earth behind the barn, where wild beans twisted up a bent stick and tiny sunflowers unfurled yellow petals. The act of planting, watering, and watching things grow reminded her of her teaching days, of kids who needed patience and gentle hands to thrive. She found herself humming as she worked, letting old melodies drift out across the field. One afternoon, as she pulled weeds near the fence, a small group of children approached, walking in a cautious cluster. At their head was Sadie, the red-haired girl with the carrot from before. Behind her shuffled Tommy and Luke, brothers known for their mischief, and shy Anna, always hiding behind her braids. Sadie grinned, holding out a handful of wildflowers. "We picked these for your horse. Can we see him again?" Grace smiled, grateful for the company. "Of course. Just move slowly. He's still nervous around loud noises." The children clustered by the fence, whispering and nudging each other as Grace led Harlan over. The big horse stretched his neck, nostrils flaring. Luke, emboldened by his friends, reached up and stroked Harlan's soft nose. Anna, after a long hesitation, offered him a tiny apple from her pocket. Harlan took it gently, his lips tickling her palm. Anna giggled, her eyes wide with wonder. Sadie piped up, "Mama says he's a hero. Is that true?" Grace knelt down, meeting their eyes. "He is. When the fire came, Harlan ran into the barn for me. He could have saved himself, but he didn't. He made sure I got out, even when it meant risking his own life." Tommy, usually skeptical, studied Harlan. He doesn't look like a hero. He looks tired. Grace nodded. He's been through a lot. But being brave doesn't mean you never get scared or hurt. Sometimes it just means you keep going, even when it's hard. The children grew quiet, each processing her words in their own way. Anna lingered after the others left, her small hand resting on Harlan's neck. My papa left last year. I talk to my cat when I miss him. Maybe that's not so crazy. Grace's eyes stung. It's not crazy at all. Sometimes animals understand us better than people do. Word began to spread that Grace and Harlan weren't as scary or strange as some claimed. Small acts of kindness multiplied. A sack of oats left on the barn step, a tin of cookies from a shy widow, a blanket patched and washed by Mrs. Porter herself, delivered with a muttered, "Waste not, want not," as she bustled away. Even the skeptical found ways to help. One morning, Mrs. Porter arrived with a jar of pungent herbs. "Steep this in hot water, rub it on his legs. My mother swore by it for a lame pony," she said gruffly. Grace thanked her, following the instructions. Soon, Harlan's limp eased, and the stiffness in his joints lessened. When she told Mrs. Porter, the older woman only sniffed, but her eyes were softer than before. With the children's visits and the townsfolk's cautious goodwill, Grace found herself doing more than just surviving. She was starting to live again. She built a swing from an old rope and hung it from the barn's sturdy beam, inviting the kids to play. Laughter echoed in the afternoons, blending with the calls of meadowlarks. One day, Sheriff Watson stopped by, tipping his hat. "Heard you've got a whole parade of visitors lately," Grace grinned. "They like Harlan. I think he likes them too." Clay nodded, then turned serious. "Some folks still aren't sure. Keep your head down, Grace. If anything happens, if anyone gives you trouble, let me know." She promised she would, though inside she wondered if she'd ever really be safe. Still, for every wary glance there was a wave or a smile. Each act of kindness was a stone in the foundation of something new, something like home. As summer deepened, the garden blossomed. The barn, once lonely and cold, now hummed with quiet life. Grace tended her plants and her horse, welcomed the children, and shared her stories. Each day, the shadows of doubt receded just a little more. One evening, as the sky flamed pink and gold, Grace stood by Harlan, her hand resting on his broad back. "We're getting there, aren't we? Little by little." Harlan bobbed his head, the faintest spark of mischief in his eye. For the first time in years, Grace let herself believe in the possibility of happiness, not just for herself, but for anyone willing to give kindness a chance. For a few precious weeks, Grace allowed herself to believe that she and Harlan might finally be safe. The rhythm of their days settled into something almost peaceful. Morning chores, afternoons in the garden, evenings sharing quiet with Harlan and the children who now came by with apples and laughter. But peace is a fragile thing in a town where memories run deep and wounds heal slow. The first sign of trouble was a rumor, whispered at the corner store and carried on the wind like a storm warning. Mrs. Porter, who usually delivered gossip with a pinch of salt, arrived at the barn one morning with a worried frown. "Heard from my nephew that the county folks are sniffing around. Talk is they're not happy with how things are being handled here. If they step in, Grace, well, there's talk they might send you off to a place for people who've lost too much. And Harlan," she trailed off, not needing to finish. Grace felt a chill in her bones. The thought of losing Harlan, of being locked away from the only soul left who understood her pain, made her breath catch. She tried to thank Mrs. Porter, but her voice shook. After that, things changed. Some neighbors grew colder, turning away when she passed in town. A few children were kept home, forbidden from visiting the barn. Grace saw curtains twitch and heard her name spoken in low, uneasy tones. One night, as thunder rumbled far off, Grace lay awake listening to Harlan shift restlessly in his stall. She thought about the rumors, the way suspicion seemed to bloom no matter how hard she tried to prove herself. Her mind circled around the memories of the fire, the sharp pain of loss, and the fear that she might lose everything again. Then came the vandals. It happened just after midnight. Grace was jolted awake by the crash of glass and the frantic sound of Harlan's hooves against the wooden floor. She scrambled from her cot, heart pounding, and saw shadows flicker across the barn walls. Someone, more than one, she realized, was inside. She ran to Harlan's side, throwing herself between the horse and the intruders. A rock sailed past her, smashing into a feed bucket. She could hear the voices, teenagers maybe, but their anger was real. "Get out of town, crazy lady. That horse should be dead already." Harlan reared, wild-eyed, snorting in terror. Grace pressed her back to his neck, shielding him as best she could. "Leave us alone, please, just leave." The kids hesitated, their bravado wavering as Harlan kicked at the stall door. Then, with a final shout, they turned and fled into the night, leaving broken glass, trampled feed, and Grace shaking in the straw. She knelt beside Harlan, whispering soothing words, her hands trembling. When dawn came, the barn was a mess, buckets overturned, the garden trampled, supplies scattered and ruined. Grace tried to clean up, swallowing her pride as she asked a neighbor for help. Sheriff Watson arrived soon after, his face grim as he surveyed the damage. "They left a message," he said quietly, pointing to the side of the barn. Someone had spray-painted a single word in angry red letters. "Crazy." Clay knelt beside Grace, his voice gentle. "I'll do what I can to keep you safe, Grace, I promise. But this town, it's divided. Some want to help. Others, well, they're scared of what they don't understand." Grace met his eyes, fear and exhaustion fighting for space in her heart. "What about the county? What if they come?" The sheriff hesitated. "If they decide you're unfit or a danger, they could take you. They could send Harlan back to auction, or worse. But you're not alone here. There are people on your side, Grace. I want you to remember that." The next few days were hard. Some neighbors brought fresh supplies and helped repair the garden. Others kept their distance, unwilling to get involved. The children came in pairs now, glancing nervously at the painted word on the barn before slipping inside to visit Harlan. Grace tried to be strong for them. She smiled, told stories, and kept her voice steady. But at night, she lay awake, listening to the barn creak, afraid that someone, or something, might return. As the days dragged on, a letter arrived from the county office, summoning her for a wellness assessment. Grace's hands shook as she read the official language, concern for her mental health, questions about Harlan's condition, warnings about public safety. She showed the letter to Sheriff Watson. "What do I do?" Clay ran a hand through his hair. "Show them you're capable. Keep things clean. Take care of the horse and yourself. If you need help, ask for it. You've got friends here, Grace. You're not fighting alone." That night, the wind howled around the barn, rattling the old windows. Grace sat with Harlan, her arms wrapped around his neck. She whispered all her fears into his mane, the tears coming freely at last. "We have to fight, Harlan. I won't let them take you from me. I don't care what it takes. I won't let them win. Harlan, sensing her pain, nuzzled her shoulder, his warm breath steady and calming. In that moment, Grace felt something inside her shift, not just fear, but a stubborn, burning determination. Let the county come. Let the doubters whisper and the vandals try to scare her. She would not be broken, not again. She and Harlan would stand their ground, no matter what. Outside, as the last light faded, the word on the barn wall glowed red and angry in the darkness. But inside, Grace began to believe that maybe, just maybe, hope was stronger than hate. The county's letter sat on the barn's old table for days, its sharp, official language seeping into every corner of Grace's mind. She read it over and over, each time feeling the walls close in tighter. It wasn't just the threat of being forced away from Harlan. It was the feeling that, no matter what she did, her past would always haunt her. That grief and madness would always be the story others told about her. But when Sheriff Watson stopped by with a handful of supportive letters from townspeople, children's drawings, a note from Mrs. Porter, even a card from Mayor Chandler, Grace realized she wasn't as alone as she'd feared. The kindness mixed with her fear, and together they gave her something new: resolve. So when the day of the town meeting arrived, Grace didn't hide in the barn. She stood in front of the mirror, brushed the straw from her hair, and put on the only good shirt she had left, a faded blue button-down that had survived the fire. She walked into town, the eyes of neighbors following her every step, some curious, some cold, some quietly hopeful. The church basement buzzed with tension as people filled the rows of folding chairs. At the front, the mayor called the meeting to order. The sheriff nodded at Grace, and for a moment, she felt her knees go weak. But she remembered Harlan's gentle nudge, the children's laughter in the barn, and found strength she didn't know she had. Mayor Chandler's voice rang out, formal and clear. "We're here to discuss the welfare of Miss Grace Ellison and her horse, Harlan, and whether she is fit to remain here under the care of our community." Grace stood, heart thudding, and walked to the front. The murmurs grew louder, a few voices hissing, "Crazy," or "Let her go home." But others whispered encouragement, soft, urgent words that carried just far enough for her to hear. She took a shaky breath. "I know some of you are afraid. I know you think I'm broken or maybe dangerous, but I'm just a person who lost her family in a fire. Harlan is the only one who stayed with me through everything. He saved my life that night. And since then, he's saved me every day by giving me something to hold on to." She looked out at the crowd, meeting every eye that would look back. "We're not just survivors. We're a part of this town. Maybe we don't fit the mold, but we don't want pity. We just want a chance to heal. Please don't take him away from me. Don't send us away." For a long moment, there was silence. Then, from the back row, a child's voice called out, "Let her stay." The words were shaky but defiant, and suddenly a wave of support rolled forward. Claps, shouts, others repeating the cry. Some adults shook their heads, muttering about rules and liability, but the mood was changing. Mrs. Porter stood, clearing her throat. "Grace saved my Tom when he got tangled in that barbed wire last week, and she's been kind to my grandchildren. Maybe the rest of us could learn something about hanging on when life gets hard." Arguments broke out. Some townsfolk worried about bad luck, about setting the wrong example. Others, inspired by Grace's courage, urged compassion. The mayor called for order, but the room was a boiling pot. Old grudges, fresh wounds, and new hope all colliding. As the debate raged, thunder began to rumble outside. low and ominous. Rain pelted the windows, the sky flickering with distant lightning. Grace felt the familiar prickle of fear. Storms always reminded her of the night everything changed. Suddenly, the church's side door banged open. Tommy, one of the children who visited the barn, burst in, breathless and wild-eyed. "Harlan's gone! The barn door's open! He's not there!" A cold wave of panic washed over Grace. She stumbled from her seat, heart pounding so loud she could barely hear the gasps behind her. "No, no, please!" Sheriff Watson jumped to his feet. "Stay calm, folks. Grace, we'll find him." The rain was coming down in sheets as Grace raced through the muddy streets, the memory of fire and loss clawing at her. Every flash of lightning showed her another field, another possible danger. Roads slick with water, fences down, ditches filling with storm runoff. Neighbors gathered outside, some calling Harlan's name, others shaking their heads. Grace's boots slipped in the mud as she sprinted across the yard, her voice raw and desperate. "Harlan! Harlan, come back!" She searched the barn, nothing but damp straw and broken latches. The wind had torn the door wide open, and Harlan's hoofprints led off into the darkness. Sheriff Watson appeared beside her, flashlight in hand. "He can't have gone far," he said. "But this storm, it's getting worse. Folks, let's spread out. Anyone who wants to help, follow me. The rest, stay safe indoors." Grace plunged into the night, refusing to let the fear swallow her whole. She remembered the night of the fire, the way Harlan had found her through the smoke and heat. She clung to the hope that somehow she could do the same for him. As lightning tore across the sky, she stumbled through flooded ditches and tangled brush, calling his name until her voice was hoarse. Faces flickered through the storm. Neighbors, friends, even strangers who had once doubted her, but now came with lanterns and ropes. And always, just ahead, the echo of hoofbeats, lost in the roar of thunder. Grace slipped, fell, struggled to her feet. "Don't stop," she whispered. "He needs you." The search stretched into the heart of the storm, every flash of lightning throwing shadows across the fields. Some neighbors gave up, but others pressed on, driven by something they couldn't name. In that endless night, Grace felt the town watching her, waiting to see if she would break or rise. She would not give up, no matter what it cost. She would stand her ground, for Harlan, for herself, for the chance at belonging that had always seemed just out of reach. The storm swallowed the night, roaring through the little town with a fury that rattled every window and threatened to peel the roof off the old Barton barn. Rain hammered down, turning dirt to rivers, and lightning split the sky in jagged bursts. Grace stumbled out into the chaos, her clothes plastered to her skin, mud sucking at her boots, panic clawing at her chest. "Harlan!" she screamed into the wind. "Harlan, where are you?" The townsfolk spread out across the flooded fields, flashlights and lanterns bobbing like fireflies in the dark. Some moved out of loyalty, others from curiosity or a sense of duty. Most had never seen Grace like this, wild-eyed and relentless, her voice raw with worry. The fear in her face cut through old suspicions, and a hush fell whenever she passed, as if everyone finally understood what this battered woman and her battered horse meant to each other. Thunder shook the sky. The mayor shouted orders, trying to organize the searchers, but the storm scattered them in all directions. Sheriff Watson was everywhere at once, barking instructions, keeping the searchers away from the flooded creek and reminding them not to risk their own lives. But even he couldn't help the knot of fear growing in his chest. He'd seen what loss did to a person. He couldn't bear to see Grace break again. Children pressed their faces to the windows, watching the grown-ups vanish into the night. In one house, Sadie, the red-haired girl, couldn't stand it any longer. She grabbed her raincoat, slipped out the back, and ran through the storm toward the barn. Tommy and Luke, never far behind, caught up to her. Anna, quiet but determined, followed with her flashlight held high. Sadie found Grace behind the barn, her knees in the mud, hands digging through the weeds for any sign of Harlan's trail. "Miss Grace," Sadie cried, grabbing her arm, "let us help. We know these fields. We can look in the ravine by the old bridge. Harlan used to like it there." For a moment, Grace hesitated, fear for the children mingling with her own, but their eyes were fierce and sure. She nodded, wiping rain from her face. "All right, stay together. Don't take risks, but help me find him. Please." They set out, the children fanning through the storm, calling Harlan's name at the tops of their lungs. Their voices, small and high, carried farther than Grace's, ringing out with hope and stubborn faith. The adults paused in their search, hearing the kids, and something shifted, a memory of their own childhoods, of the things they'd lost or wished they'd found. The mayor's husband, Mr. Chandler, called to his neighbors. "If the children are out here, we'd better make sure they're safe and help them while we're at it." Others followed, their lanterns cutting wide arcs in the downpour. Farther down the road, Sheriff Watson found a set of hoofprints in the mud, deeper than the rest. He knelt, examining them, rain streaming off his hat. "He's headed east, toward the ravine," he shouted, waving the others over. The search party pushed forward, sliding down the slick bank toward the bridge. The water below was swollen, foaming around rocks and roots. Sadie was the first to spot something, two glimmers reflecting back her flashlight from beneath a tangled branch. "I see him. Harlan's down there." Grace tore down the slope, slipping and sliding, heart in her throat. There, in the shadow of the ravine, Harlan lay trapped. One back leg wedged between two roots, mud caked up to his flank. His eyes rolled in fear, but when he saw Grace, he tried to lift his head, letting out a thin, desperate whinny. "It's okay," Grace called, fighting tears. "I'm here. Hold on, boy." The others crowded behind her, children, townsfolk, even people who doubted or whispered against her only days before. Sheriff Watson assessed the situation quickly. "We'll need ropes. Somebody run to the Chandler barn. Get the tow line. And a couple of strong backs. Hensley, come on." While the men hurried off, Grace crawled to Harlan's side, her hands shaking. She stroked his neck, murmuring every soothing word she knew. Anna knelt beside her, shining the flashlight so Grace could see. Tommy and Luke tore branches away, their hands muddy and raw. Minutes stretched on like hours. The rain seemed to pause, the storm holding its breath. When the ropes arrived, Sheriff Watson and Mr. Hensley worked them around Harlan's body, careful not to hurt him. The whole town gathered at the lip of the ravine, pulling together, straining with every ounce of strength. "On three," the sheriff called. "1, 2, 3. The line went taut. For a terrifying moment, Harlan didn't move. Then, with a guttural grunt and a surge of desperate energy, he scrambled free of the roots. The townspeople cheered as he staggered up the muddy bank, flanks heaving, Grace never letting go of his mane. Soaked to the bone, hearts pounding, everyone circled around Grace and Harlan, relief and awe etched on every face. Even those who'd painted crazy on the barn days before found themselves wiping tears and clapping backs. The mayor, voice trembling, said what everyone felt. "We wouldn't have found him without Grace, and without these brave kids." hush settled. Grace hugged Harlan, weeping openly, and the children crowded in, their arms wrapping around her and the horse alike. In that moment, the boundaries between outcast and neighbor, wounded and whole, began to blur. Grace looked up and saw for the first time not suspicion or pity, but belonging. The storm faded, replaced by a cautious dawn. The people drifted home, changed by what they'd done together. For the first time in years, the town was united by a rescue, by a stubborn horse, and by the courage of a woman who refused to let go. The sun rose clear and gold the next morning, washing away the last traces of the storm. The town of Mayfield woke changed. For days, neighbors swapped stories of that wild night, how Grace Ellison had braved the darkness, how the children had led the search, how even the most skeptical among them had pulled together to rescue Harlan from the ravine. It became a legend almost instantly, echoing through kitchens and barbershops and the aisles of Chandler's Market. Grace barely slept, her body aching from exhaustion, but her mind full of a restless, grateful energy. She sat in the barn, running her hands along Harlan's coat, careful around the scrapes on his legs but marveling at his strength. The old stallion had survived once more, as if fate herself had bent to their stubborn will. Word spread that Harlan was recovering. Curious townsfolk drifted by the barn, bringing treats, oats, apples, molasses cakes, even flowers. Some came just to see him, to touch his flank or whisper thanks. More than one person, eyes shining, confessed, "I wasn't sure you belonged here, Grace. I was wrong. You've made us all braver." Grace accepted every gesture with humility, her heart swelling with each kind word. But it was the children who made her feel most at home. They arrived daily, tending the garden, grooming Harlan, and inventing elaborate stories about the hero horse, who had once outrun fire and now survived a raging flood. One morning, as Grace helped Sadie and Anna plant new sunflowers beside the barn, Mayor Ruth Chandler approached, her usual brisk manner softened by uncertainty. She paused, watching the girls work, then cleared her throat. "Grace, the council met last night," she began. "We talked a long while about everything you and Harlan have endured and what you've done for this town. We decided we'd like to offer you a job. The children trust you, and frankly, so do we." Grace looked up, surprised. "What kind of job?" Ruth smiled, a rare and genuine expression. "We need a children's counselor. Someone who understands loss, fear, and healing. Someone who can teach them what you've taught us. About courage, kindness, and starting over." The offer caught Grace off guard, but joy blossomed in her chest. She nodded, voice thick. "Thank you, Mayor. I'd be honored." As if to celebrate, the town decided to throw a New Beginnings festival. Plans buzzed through the streets. Mrs. Porter coordinated a bake sale. The Chandlers offered their front yard for games, and the local band rehearsed late into the night. Kids made posters, painting pictures of Harlan and Grace, and even the gruffest old-timers pitched in, patching the barn roof and stringing lanterns along the fence. On the day of the festival, sunlight spilled across the square. Tables overflowed with pies and lemonade, laughter rippled on the breeze, and the scent of grilling meat mingled with fresh-cut grass. Grace wore her best dress, her hair braided back, and walked at Harlan's side as the children led him down Main Street, a crown of sunflowers on his head. Sheriff Watson took the microphone, clearing his throat as the crowd gathered. "A month ago, this town was divided, some of us unsure, some a little afraid. But when it mattered most, we came together. We're here today to celebrate new beginnings, for all of us, and to thank Grace Ellison for reminding us what community means. The crowd erupted in applause, the sound rolling down the street like thunder. Grace blushed, but stood tall, squeezing Harlan's mane. She stepped forward to say a few words, her voice clear. "I thought I'd lost everything," she began, scanning the faces she now knew so well. "But I was wrong. When you find people willing to stand by you, even when you're at your lowest, you realize that family isn't just blood. It's everyone who refuses to give up on you. Thank you for refusing to give up on me." She looked at the children, at the faces beaming with pride and hope. "Harlan and I are lucky. But maybe luck isn't just something that happens. It's something we build together every time we choose kindness over fear." That afternoon, as music played and the children danced around the barn, Ruth Chandler handed Grace the keys to a small cottage on Maple Lane. "You've earned a home of your own," she said. "No more sleeping in barns, unless you want to." Tears welled in Grace's eyes. She hugged Ruth fiercely, laughter bubbling up through her tears. Sheriff Watson came by later with a stack of mail, cards from neighboring towns, some from people Grace had never met, all wishing her and Harlan well. The barn itself was transformed. The children painted murals of horses and sunflowers across its faded boards, and a new sign, hand-carved and painted in bright colors, declared it a town landmark, Grace and Harlan's Refuge. News of their story spread far beyond Mayfield. Journalists came, snapping photos of Harlan with his sunflower crown and Grace surrounded by kids. Other towns called, asking how they could create their own sanctuaries, how they could help families and animals in need. As twilight fell, Grace sat with Harlan in the barn's wide door, watching lanterns flicker along the fence and listening to the laughter drift up into the night. The barn, once a place of shadows and doubt, now glowed with light and hope. Grace felt the past at her back, the pain, the fire, the loneliness. But ahead of her, everything shone with promise. She reached up, running her hand along Harlan's warm neck. "We made it," she whispered, "against all the odds." The old stallion let out a low, contented nicker, as if agreeing. For the first time in years, Grace felt completely at home, not because she had finally escaped her pain, but because she'd found people willing to face it with her. And in helping Harlan heal, she had helped herself and the whole town begin again. Autumn settled over Mayfield, bringing crisp mornings and the golden hush of leaves drifting from the cottonwoods. The town, once divided by suspicion and gossip, now hummed with a gentler rhythm. Grace felt it every time she walked down Main Street. Shopkeepers waving, neighbors stopping to chat, children running up to share news or ask for another story about Harlan. With her new job as the children's counselor, Grace found purpose in the heart of the community. She set up a reading circle in the library, a weekly art class in the old schoolhouse, and invited the children to help with chores at the barn after school. Word spread quickly. Kids who had once whispered crazy now argued over who got to brush Harlan's mane or gather eggs from Grace's small flock of hens. One afternoon, Grace was invited to speak at a community meeting in the church basement. The room was packed. Parents, teachers, neighbors, even a few from neighboring towns, all curious to hear how the woman and her horse had brought Mayfield back together. Grace felt the familiar flutter of nerves, but when she glanced down at the first row, she saw Sadie, Tommy, Anna, and half a dozen others beaming up at her. Harlan stood just outside, poking his head in through the open window, making the children giggle. She took a breath and began. "When I first came back to Mayfield, I didn't believe I had anything left to give. I was lost, angry, ashamed, and convinced the world had turned its back on me. The only thing that kept me going was Harlan, my family when I had none. He never judged me for my grief or my fear. He stood by me, even when I had nothing to offer but love. The room was silent except for the creak of the old pews. I've learned a lot since then. I've learned that loyalty isn't just about never leaving. It's about standing by someone even when it's hard. When you choose to forgive, to give someone a second chance, you're not just saving them. You're saving yourself, too. I see it every day in this town, in the way people have chosen kindness over suspicion, and in the way you've given me and Harlan a chance to start over. She smiled at the children. We're all survivors of something. Maybe it's loss, maybe it's loneliness, maybe it's just the struggle to be seen for who we really are. What matters is what we do with our pain, whether we use it to build walls or bridges. After the meeting, people lingered to share their own stories. Losses, small triumphs, the quiet ways they'd survived heartache. Grace listened, offered a hand or a hug, and felt the weight of her own sorrow lighten piece by piece. She began to speak at the school as well, telling the children not just about the fire and the fear, but about hope and forgiveness. She told them how Harlan, battered and written off by everyone else, had become her lifeline. Sometimes the ones who seem most broken, she said, are the ones who teach us the most about strength. The children listened, rapt, and began to look at each other and themselves a little differently. Sadie, once shy and angry after her father left, blossomed into a leader, organizing games and helping younger kids feel welcome. Anna, who rarely spoke, painted bright murals on the barn's walls, her art telling stories that words never could. Even Tommy and Luke, who had once tossed rocks through Grace's window, became her staunchest helpers, eager to prove their loyalty. The town started to change, too. Mayor Chandler convened a new committee, this one dedicated to supporting trauma survivors, both human and animal. They set up a small fund to help families in crisis and organized volunteers to repair homes, care for pets, and deliver groceries to the sick or elderly. Grace found herself at the center of it all, humbled by how far they'd come. One day, a neighboring town sent a letter, asking for advice. Their own community was struggling with the aftermath of a tornado, and they wanted to know how Mayfield had managed to heal old wounds and start fresh. Grace visited, bringing Harlan along, and shared the story of second chances. Soon, more towns called, eager to learn and to help. The lessons of Harlan echoed everywhere. Grace spoke often of forgiveness, not just of others, but of oneself. She reminded everyone that guilt, shame, and fear were powerful, but so was compassion. You can't change the past, she told the children at the library, but you can choose what kind of future you build, one act of kindness at a time. The barn became a place of gathering, a safe haven for anyone feeling lost. People dropped by to share coffee, lend a hand, or simply sit with Grace and Harlan in the quiet golden afternoons. Some came seeking comfort after a loss. Others just wanted to be reminded that hope could be rebuilt from ashes. As the leaves turned and the days grew shorter, Grace looked around at all that had changed. The town was still far from perfect. There were still arguments, still doubts, still moments of anger and fear. But there was also laughter, trust, and a sense of connection that hadn't existed before. On a cool October evening, Grace stood in the barn doorway, watching Harlan graze peacefully in the fading light. Children's voices echoed from the garden, where Anna and Sadie chased each other, their laughter sharp and sweet. Grace felt a deep gratitude settle in her bones. She knew there would be more storms ahead, more losses and more doubts. But she also knew, as surely as she knew her own name, that she and Harlan, and all of Mayfield, could weather them together. For the first time, Grace believed the lessons she'd shared, that kindness could heal, that forgiveness could free, and that the bonds forged in darkness could last a lifetime. Years passed, and Mayfield changed in ways Grace could never have imagined the day she first clung to Harlan in the dust and fear of the auction barn. The seasons spun their wheel, winters snowy and still, springs bursting with wildflowers, summers golden and hot, autumns mellow and kind. The barn on the edge of town, once a shelter of last resort, became a sanctuary known throughout the county as the Harlan Project. The sign outside was new but weathered, painted bright blue with sunflowers curling around the letters. Children's handprints dotted the boards. Underneath, smaller words read, "A place for second chances. People and animals welcome." Grace was no longer the haunted stranger in town. She was Miss Grace to the children, Counselor Ellison to new families, and just Grace to the friends who'd stood by her through every storm. She found herself surrounded by laughter most days, her old wounds softened by time, forgiveness, and community. Harlan, now graying around the muzzle, wore his years with quiet pride. He moved slower, sometimes favoring his back leg on cold mornings, but his eyes were bright and wise. To the kids, he was a living legend. To the grown-ups, he was a symbol of survival, of loyalty, of the power of one creature's love to change a town. The sanctuary was always full. Some days brought single mothers with tired eyes and little ones in tow, escaping homes full of shouting and fear. Other days, it was wounded dogs, cats, even the occasional wild bird with a broken wing. Grace welcomed everyone, human or animal, into the old barn and the circle of warmth she'd built. Sheriff Watson, grayer now but still sharp, often stopped by with groceries or an extra pair of hands. Mrs. Porter, no longer just the town gossip, but now its unofficial grandmother, baked bread every Sunday and ran story time for the little ones in the barn's hayloft. Mayor Chandler's hair had gone silver, but she still made sure the town's budget included a line for the Harlan Project every year. On summer evenings, the sanctuary came alive with music and laughter. Families gathered for potlucks under the fairy lights strung across the yard. Children played hide-and-seek in the garden, their voices ringing out long after dusk. Grace would sit with Harlan under the stars, feeling the ache of old grief transformed into something deep and steady, something like peace. One day, a boy arrived at the barn, quiet, skittish, clutching a battered backpack. His name was Eli, and he'd just lost his father. He refused to speak for weeks, but each day he sat by Harlan's pen, feeding him apples and brushing his coat. Harlan, gentle as ever, stood perfectly still, letting Eli sob into his mane on the hard days. When Eli finally spoke, it was to ask, "Miss Grace, can anyone stay here, even if they don't have anywhere else to go?" Grace knelt beside him, her answer soft and certain. "That's why we built this place, Eli. For anyone who needs a family, even if it's just for a while." The story of the Harlan Project spread. Local teachers brought students on field trips to learn about kindness and courage. Neighboring towns sent volunteers and supplies. Even the county officials who had once threatened to take everything away now sent grants and praise. Mayfield was on the map, not for tragedy, but for the way it had rebuilt itself around the broken and the brave. Grace often spoke at gatherings, sharing what she'd learned. Family isn't always the people you're born to, she'd tell new arrivals. Sometimes it's the ones who show up when everything falls apart, who stay and fight for you when you can't fight for yourself. Sometimes it's the horse who carries you through the flames, or the neighbor who brings you soup, or the child who believes in second chances. She taught the children to plant sunflowers every spring, a tradition that filled the fields around the barn with gold. The flowers reminded them that beauty could grow even from burned ground. Each bloom was a promise, to the lost, the wounded, the lonely, that hope could return, no matter how dark things seemed. On the anniversary of the night Harlan was rescued from the ravine, the town gathered for a special celebration. The barn was strung with lanterns. Kids performed a play they'd written about the hero horse and the woman who wouldn't give up. Sheriff Watson read a poem, and Mrs. Porter led a hymn. At dusk, Grace stood in the circle of friends, her hand on Harlan's neck, and spoke from the heart. "There was a time I thought I'd never belong anywhere again," she said, her voice steady, carrying over the quiet crowd. "But it turns out, belonging isn't about blood or history. It's about the people and creatures who stand with you in your darkest hour. It's about choosing love, again and again, even when it's hard. And sometimes, it only takes one loyal friend to help an entire town find its heart again." As darkness fell and the fireflies blinked along the fence line, Grace felt a gentle weight lift from her shoulders. The pain of old losses was still there, but so was something stronger, a joy built from years of healing, forgiveness, and chosen family. Harlan stood beside her, steady and sure, a living memory of how far they'd come. And all around them, the town that once doubted had become something new, a place where second chances bloomed, and no one ever had to face the night alone.